So we're in 2.8 of the book, and chapter 8 picks up right where chapter 7 left off. So the Monsignor is on his way home, so the Marquis specifically is on his way home, and we're going to see sort of just a couple of the stops that he makes. But he's just hit Gaspard's son, don't forget. He had that moment where he called the peasants rats. All of that is super important. Madame Defarge is the only one to look him in the eye directly, which there's a ton of really important information with that. So just think about all of those things, and then we get to chapter 8. So it says, a beautiful landscape with the corn bright in it, but not abundant. Patches of poor rye where corn should have been, patches of poor peas and beans, patches of the most coarse vegetable substitutes for wheat. On inanimate nature, as on the women and men who cultivated it, a prevalent tendency toward an appearance of vegetating unwillingly, a dejected disposition to give up and wither away. Monsieur the Marquis, in his travelling carriage, which might have been lighter, conducted by 4 post horses and 2 postilions, fagged up a steep hill. A blush on the countenance means face, of Monsieur the Marquis was no impeachment of his high breeding. It was not from within. It was occasioned by an external circumstance beyond his control, the setting sun. So, picture this. If this were a movie, the sun is setting. It's casting a red glow on the Marquis's face. What does that mean? What are you thinking about? To go on even further, it says the sunset struck so brilliantly into the traveling carriage when it gained the hilltop that its occupant was steeped in crimson. Crimson is red. It will die out, said Monsieur the Marquis, glancing at his hands directly. So, if you're looking at his hands, if you're looking at his face, it appears that he has what color on them? The answer's red. We think about blood. He just said the words, it will die out. This is foreshadowing what? He's going to die. Think about who would kill him. Who would be the person that would want him dead the most? We'll talk about it in class. In effect, the sun was so low that it dipped at the moment when the heavy drag had been adjusted to the wheel, and the carriage slid downhill with a cinderous smell in a cloud of dust, and the red glow departed quickly. The sun and the Marquis going down together, there was no glow left when the drag was taken off. But there remained a broken country, bold and open, a little village at the bottom of the hill, a broad sweep and rise beyond it, a church tower, a windmill, a forest for the chase, and a crag with a fortress on it used as a prison. Round upon all these darkening objects as the night drew on, the Marquis looked with the air of one who was coming near home. So he's getting really close to his house. The village had its one poor street with its poor brewery, poor tannery, poor tavern, poor stable yard for relay of post horses, poor fountain, all usual poor appointments. It had its poor people too. All its people were poor, and many of them were sitting at their doors shredding spare onions and the like for supper, while many were at the fountain washing leaves and grasses and any such small yieldings of earth that could be eaten. So, what's really important is the Marquis's job is to take care of the people that live on his land, right? So Monsignor, he's a wealthy landowner. He takes care of all of these people. He's the landlord. They're the tenants, right? They pay to live on the land. They work on the land, except he doesn't take care of them, right? So we know what he's one of these guys that are drinking their hot chocolate in the morning with 4 people to serve it to them, while the poor people are eating onions and grass for dinner. So again, that juxtaposition or that contrast. So that, jumping down to the next paragraph, it says, few children were to be seen and no dogs, because people are eating the dogs and children are dying. As to the men and women, their choice on earth was stated in the prospect, life on the lowest terms that could sustain it down in the little village under the mill, or captivity and death in the dominant prison on the crag. Heralded by a courier in advance and by the cracking of his postilions' whips, so for the horses, which twined snake-like about their heads in the evening air, as if he came attended by the Furies. This is a Greek mythological allusion. We can talk about it later. Monsieur the Marquis drew up in his traveling carriage at the posting-house gate. It was hard by the fountain, and the peasants suspended their operations to look at him. He looked at them and saw in them, without knowing it, the slow, sure filing down of misery-worn face and figure that was to make the meagerness of Frenchman and English superstition which would survive the truth through the best part of 100 years. Like the stereotype that French people are always skinny, he's saying, comes from this. Monsieur the Marquis cast his eyes over the submissive faces that drooped before him, as the like of himself had drooped before Monseigneur of the court. Only the difference was that these faces drooped merely to suffer and not to propitiate, when a grizzled mender of the roads joined the group. So, new character. His name is the Road Mender. That's all we're ever going to know him as. Again, seems like a random, unimportant, doesn't matter character. He does. So, write down Road Mender or Mender of Roads, either one. Okay. Bring me hither that fellow, said the Marquis to the courier. The fellow was brought, cap in hand, and the other fellows closed round to look and listen in the manner of the people at the Paris fountain. I passed you on the road? Monseigneur, it is true, I had the honor of being passed on the road. Coming up the hill, and the top of the hill both? Monseigneur, it's true. What did you look at so fixedly? Monseigneur, I looked at the man. He stooped a little, and with his tattered blue cap pointed under the carriage, all his fellows stooped to look under the carriage. What man, pig, and why look there? Pardon, Monseigneur, he swung by the chain of the shoe, the drag. Who? Demanded the traveler. Monseigneur, the man. So, as the Marquis is traveling home, he's looking out his carriage window, and he sees that there's this road mender, this man whose literal job it is to mend roads, fix the road, is staring at him as he's traveling, and he's looking underneath his carriage. So the Marquis stops, he gets him called over, and he says, hey, what were you looking at? And the road mender's response was, I'm looking at the man who's hanging on underneath the carriage. Who's the man? Who would be the man following the Marquis home, hanging on underneath the carriage? So, may the devil carry away these idiots. How do you call the man? You all know the men of this part of the country. Who was he? Your clemency, Monseigneur, he was not of this part of the country. Of all the days of my life, I never saw him. Swinging by the chain to be suffocated? With your gracious permission, that was the wonder of it, Monseigneur. His head was hanging over like this. He turned himself sideways to the carriage and leaned back with his face thrown up to the sky and his head hanging down, then recovered himself, fumbled with his cap, and made a bow. What was he like? So, tell me what he looked like. Monseigneur, he was whiter than a miller, all covered with dust, white as a spectre, and tall as a spectre. So the clue is he was covered in white, obviously from the dust of the road, but he was very tall. So think about who we've been told all along is this tall man. The picture produced an immense sensation in the little crowd, but all eyes, without comparing notes with other eyes, looked at Monsieur the Marquis, perhaps to observe whether he had any spectre on his conscience. Truly you did well, said the Marquis felicitously, sensible that such vermin were not to ruffle him, to see a thief accompanying my carriage, and not open that great mouth of yours. Bah, put him aside. Monsieur Gabelle? Monsieur Gabelle was the postmaster and some other taxing functionary united. He had come out with great obsequiousness to assist at this examination, and had held the examined by the drapery of his arm in an official manner. I'm pretty sure in French, or in history, you learn about the fact that Gabelle is a salt tax. Is that right? It's some sort of tax. So anyway, Dickens would have known that. And this guy, Monsieur Gabelle, he works as the tax collector, the go-between between the peasants that are living on the Marquis' property and the Marquis. Lay hands on the stranger if he seeks to lodge in your village tonight, and be sure that his business is honest, Gabelle. So basically what happened is when the carriage stopped, the guy, Gaspard, who was hanging on underneath the carriage, ran off. And so that's why they don't know where he is and didn't catch him. Monsieur, I'm flattered to devote myself to your orders. Did he run away, fellow? Where is the accursed? The accursed was already under the carriage with some half-dozen particular friends, pointing out the chain with his blue cap, the road mender. Some half-dozen other particular friends promptly hauled him out and presented him breathless to Monsieur the Marquis. Did the man run away, Dolt, when we stopped for the drag? Monseigneur, he precipitated himself over the hillside, head first, as a person plunges into a river. See to it, Gabelle. Go on. The half-dozen who were peering at the chain were still among the wheels like sheep. The wheels turned so suddenly that they were lucky to save their skins and bones. They had very little else to save, or they might not have been so fortunate. The burst with which the carriage started out of the village and up the rise beyond was soon checked by the steepness of the hill. Gradually it subsided to a foot pace, swinging and lumbering upward among the many sweet scents of a summer night. The postilions, with 1,000 gossamer gnats, circled about them in lieu of the Furies, quickly mended the points to the lashes of their whips. The valet walked by the horses. The courier was audible, trotting on ahead into the dim distance. At the steepest point of the hill there was a little burial ground with a cross and a new large figure of our Savior on it. It was a poor figure in wood, done by some inexperienced rustic carver, but he had studied the figure from his life, his own life maybe, for it was dreadfully spare and thin. So on his way home, before he gets there, there's a little cemetery that he drives by. I can't breathe. To this distressful emblem of a great distress that had long been growing worse and was not at its worst, a woman was kneeling. She turned her head as the carriage came up to her, rose quickly, and presented herself at the carriage door. "It is you, Monsignor, Monsignor, a petition." With an exclamation of impatience, but with his unchangeable face, Monsignor looked out. "How, then? What is it? Always petitions." "Monsignor, for the love of the great God, my husband, the forester." "What of your husband, the forester? Always the same with you people. He cannot pay something?" "He has paid all, Monsignor. He is dead." "Well, he's quiet. Can I restore him to you?" "Alas, no, Monsignor, but he lies yonder under a little heap of poor grass." "Well?" So basically the Monsignor doesn't care what this woman is saying. "Monsignor, there are so many leaps of poor grass." Again, "Well?" She looked like an old woman, but was young. So because of her experiences, because of her starvation, she looks older than she actually is. Her manner was one of passionate grief. By turns, she clasped her veinous and knotted hands together with a wild energy, and laid one of them on the carriage door tenderly, caressingly, as if it had been a human breast, and could be expected to feel the appealing touch. "Monsignor, hear me. Monsignor, hear my petition. My husband died of want. So many die of want. So many more will die of want." Again, "Well, can I feed them?" "Monsignor, the good God knows, but I don't ask it. My petition," so she's not even asking for food, "my petition is that a morsel of stone or wood with my husband's name be placed over him to show where he lies." So all she wants is a grave marker, because there are so many heaps, she says, of bodies that had been buried, and they can't afford anything to put over them, like we would use a gravestone today, right? And she just wants something that's going to sort of mark where her husband is. Otherwise, the place will be quickly forgotten. It will be laid under some other heap of, it shall never be found when I am dead of the same malady. So I'm going to probably die of starvation too, and I'm going to be forgotten as well. I shall be laid under some other heap of poor grass. Monsignor, there are so many, they increase so fast, there is so much want, Monsignor, Monsignor. The valet had put her away from the door, the carriage had broken into a brisk trot, and the postilions had quickened the pace. She was left far behind, and Monsignor again, escorted by the Furies, Greek mythology, was rapidly diminishing the league or two of distance that remained between him and his chateau. Chateau is the French word for house, so he's coming home. The sweet sense of the summer night rose all around him, and rose as the rain falls impatiently on the dusty, ragged, and toil-worn group at the fountain not far away, to whom the mender of roads, with the aid of the blue cap, without which he was nothing, still enlarged upon his man like a spectre as long as they could bear it. By degrees they could bear no more, and they dropped off one by one, and the lights twinkled in little casements, which lights,